It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. Preview edition of the Take Command podcast. Commanders and Cardinals coming up on Sunday from Arizona. Where Logan, I hope the weather is better for you than it's been here in DC this week.
It's been nice, a little gross,
sunny, and this is not good here.
Yeah, it's supposed to be really hot. I think Kyle was saying it was like 102 degrees on his podcast down there or something like that. So I don't know if he was exaggerating or if it actually was like 102 degrees. It seems a little late in the year for that to be that hot. But
don't forget, though, it's just a dry heat.
It's a dry heat. That's exactly right. It is different now.
It is. Dan Quinn was saying, no, we were just trying to bring Virginia to Arizona. We're talking about like bringing all their equipment because the team's practicing out there and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, can you bring some parts of Arizona back with you to DC then? Like no humidity, perhaps some tacos. Not that there's not great tacos in the district, but I'm just saying. By the way, real quick before we dive into the X's and O's, have you ever done what they're doing this week in terms of staying on the road for a week and practicing somewhere else?
No, I think the closest thing is obviously when you do training camp like in Richmond, which is something is approximately similar. You know what I mean? They've got a facility that they're using. You're staying at a hotel. The meeting rooms are all set up in the hotel. So I have like a vision of how that would look, but I never did it for a game. And so I do think it's kind of special. You know, we talked about this a little bit on the Command Center podcast yesterday, and Fred brought up a great point, which he's known to do on occasion, just stumbles into him every once in a while.
When you talk as much as Fred does, you're bound to be right a couple of times.
And he was like, it shows kind of the investment ownership's willing to make in the team. You know, like if Dan's like, hey, this is what we need to do, and Adam's like, this is what we need to do, and then it's like, cool, do it. And like, think about how much better recovered this team's going to be going to that week as opposed to taking, a flight home, a flight back, and like kind of getting situated and having to get practice all worked out. You had a day of practice, you had a day of prep, you had basically a full day of recovery. It's pretty smart, I think. And so as long as guys are locked in and getting what they need to get done, and I think it's going to be very beneficial, and we'll see obviously what the result looks like on Sunday. But I just thought that was cool that this is something I don't think would have ever happened with Dan here, and here it is like in the first year, and I think it's pretty telling of the like everyone's like, oh, it's the same. These are the types of things that hopefully fans can see, because you've been to training camp and we've seen the new grass field. I've been in the building. I've seen they've totally renovated the whole building already. New meeting rooms, new everything, new offices. We got a new studio. Like they're doing everything the right way, and that's different. And like this is another outward example of what's different with the team. So
yeah, and not to mention like routine is so important. And you were a guy that was a creature of habit as a player, and so what you've done now is you've let it's a condensed timeline because of Monday Night Football. So that's part of the calculation here too. But you have less flights and all the things you said, but also because you're out on the West Coast earlier, like your body can adapt. Yeah. And now like it's basically a 1:00 game on Sunday. And so all the routines and all the things that you're used to are just happening, and then they'll get back here and they'll be like, oh, right, it's a different time. And so to have that routine level, I think is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think more for your body clock, because they've, when I was playing, it kind of went from, you want to get out there 2 days early to you want to get out there basically almost the day of, and so teams would do different stuff. But this is a way to kind of manage that even more acutely and basically be like, hey, we're not going to mess with that. We're going to get you out there early. You're going to get fully adjusted, get some good rest, and, we can get good work done. And we're not worried about, again, the recovery. And people say, oh, it's a trip. Like, you feel different coming off the plane, man. You feel different kind of having to adjust to the to the time change for sure. So I think it's nice. I think it's awesome. And hopefully they get a W coming out here in Arizona, which would be great. So
yeah, no, it would be fantastic. Obviously, if they do, they would be 3-1, which is not what I think any of us predicted, but would happily take. They're already halfway, of course, to their win total last year. But Logan, as we know, last year they started 2-0. So things can change. It is early. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, as exciting as Monday night was. And there already is a little bit of bad news coming into the week, and we'll talk about it a little bit more as we get into the preview here. But Austin Eckler has been ruled out of this game, as has Cleveland Ferrell. There's a couple guys on Arizona that are banged up as well. Buda Baker and Marvin Harrison were limited in practice. They've had, Kelvin Beachum, their starting right tackle, was back in practice after missing the game over the weekend. They got a couple other guys that are banged up, but as usual, unfortunately, the way time and space work, when we record these, we don't know the full injury report as we're doing this on Thursday morning. So stay tuned to, I don't know, Logan, live radio, perhaps?
Maybe.
106.7 The Fan, the Team 980. Perhaps we can keep you up to date as things happen. That is the beauty of live radio. So keep it tuned to your local favorite radio station. I humbly suggest the Team 980 for all the latest injury updates, and we'll have it for you on the Hoffman Show from 4 to 7 and how that's going to impact the game. But, Logan, with what we know right now, we've watched the tape. You have watched a lot of Arizona tape. I did a bit of a crash course this morning, and I came away from watching Arizona going, man, this is a good team. They're on their P's and Q's. Kyler is hella dangerous, although there are some weaknesses in his game that hopefully this team can expose. But there's also some strengths to his game that perhaps line up with some weaknesses of this football team. When you watch Drew Petzing and this, who's the OC, and what he's doing with this offense, what's the stuff that jumps out to you with Arizona?
Well, I think really the thing that jumps out to me is like specifically in their first two games, they played the Bills and they played the LA Rams, and Kyler Murray is like the straw that stirs the drink. You know, like he's a pretty dynamic player, and I say that because like he's kind of the guy that manufactures all their explosive plays and all that kind of stuff. Like he's a tremendous scrambler. He's got tremendous arm talent. Like against the LA Rams, he made some of the most ridiculous throws you'll ever see. And I know the Rams are banged up and they're not at 100% strength, but man, like he just has so much talent and so much potential. But I do think with that talent and potential, there's also games like the Detroit Lions, where the Detroit Lions came out and basically were like, we're going to like beat you up a little bit. Not him personally, but them as a team. And, you know, they've got this big hulking defensive line, Detroit, and they were just like, you're not going to run the ball. And I will say, you know, I said that Kyler's the guy that kind of stirs the drink, but like James Conner in this analogy is the drink, right? He's the thing that like is the offense. And what I mean by that is like they're not great on third down. Obviously against the LA Rams, they were tremendous on third down. They were, you know, I think they were 64%, like crazy converge percentage. But then they played the Detroit Lions. They couldn't run the ball. I think James Conner had averaged like 1.5 yards a carry. And their offense just gets so stagnant. Like, because Kyler, while being very dynamic, you do not want him like living in the pocket. Like he just is not, that's not his thing. You know what I mean? Like he just doesn't look comfortable. He doesn't look settled. I don't know how well he sees it. So Petzing, I think, has done a pretty good job of being like, hey, we're going to boot you out. We're going to do like a little bit of a waggle. We're going to get you vision down the field. We're going to kind of do some different stuff to help you see what we're doing. But in those straight drop back situations, especially against Detroit, and Detroit, again, they're a good front, but they're able to kind of collapse the pocket around him. And there's obviously times where like he can't see what's happening, you know, and he's trying to buy time. He's trying to find windows, and it really gets tough. And so, for as talented as he is, like if they're not in a good down and distance where they can be doing some play action, they can be doing some keepers, he does struggle a little bit. So again, like you watch his highlights, man, like they're tremendous. Like holy cow, like his ability to just kind of flick his wrist and get that ball out there. He's very accurate. His scrambling ability is elite. Like he just crosses lines, you know, like I don't know how fast he is, but sometimes you're like, he looks like he's the fastest dude on the field.
He's so twitchy.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So to me, that's probably like the crux of their offense. It's like they want to run the football. They want to stay in a positive down and distance, which isn't anything like revolutionary when you talk about football. Everyone wants to do that, but I do think it's way more important for them. Like even for like Joe Burrow, like down and distance, it was kind of like 3rd and 10, 2nd and 9. I don't care because I can make the throws. And I felt like with Kyler Murray watching him, there definitely was some regression as the down and distance increased, and he had to win from the pocket more. And so I think if you're looking for like a path to victory for the Commanders, it's like in a different way than the Bengals. It's like stop the run. You can play like they've got some good receivers. They've got Marvin Harrison Jr. is a young player, Michael Wilson, who I think is underrated. It's a good 2 there. I think you can match up okay with these guys in a way that you couldn't match up with Tampa Bay and you couldn't match up with Cincinnati. Match up, play a little bit more man, blitz, stop the run, do whatever you got to do, and then and those longer down and distances play softer zones. It's kind of what I would approach, and we'll see what Joe Wood Jr. does. But I think to me that is the That's the key here. That's the key to stopping this offense.
Yeah, there's a huge double-edged sword with blitzing Kyler, and that is if you get home, you're in good shape, and teams have been able to get home on him and limit him, and the receivers haven't separated great in some of those situations against the blitz. He's throwing in a ton of tight windows, and against the blitz, he is 29th in the NFL in EPA per dropback. EPA estimated points added. So against the blitz, that means every time Kyler Murray drops back, they are losing points when he drops back against the blitz. He is 5th in overall EPA per dropback in total. So blitz, non-blitz. So it tells you how good he is when he is not blitz. And I think the problem with blitzing him is you then have to play man-to-man on the back end. Yeah. And then if he gets out, like, you're in deep trouble because he can pick up 30 yards on a scramble. And you see it happen in the Buffalo game, amongst others. Obviously, there's only played 3 games, but like go back years, and this is what Kyler.
The Detroit Lions, he had like a 1st and 20 that he picks up against. Yeah. You mentioned the one against the Bills. Like he's special as a runner now. Like I don't know. Like I knew he was, but seeing him kind of fully healthy coming off that ACL, because like last year he wasn't quite right, but this year it's like you see how special he is physically. I think that's the thing. Is like maybe Lamar, but he is kind of one of one in terms of his physical ability, like arm talent, movement skills. Like his
ability to throw from any platform while having that level of movement skill. Yeah. Like obviously he doesn't see it or execute it as well as Mahomes. But if I was to pick another quarterback in the NFL to play quarterback horse, if you will, against Patrick Mahomes, it'd probably be Josh Allen, but Kyler Murray might be next. In terms of any throw from any platform, and then you add the running dynamic, and he's super special. But what makes, at this point, Josh, and by the way, getting to watch Josh Allen play because, the Bills Cardinals was their first matchup of the season. That dude is ridiculous. He's the MVP of the league so far this year. But outside, what makes Josh Allen at this point in his career and Pat special is like they do crush you from the pocket. And you definitely see times when you watch Kyler on tape where you're like, I don't think you see anything, which tracks because he's 5'9" and he's, playing behind 6'4" offensive linemen. And if he gets too close to them, he literally cannot see over them. So you have to be able to throw with anticipation. You have to be able to find the windows. And, if you can do a good job as a rusher of kind of closing that down, of making it real muddy, you don't even necessarily have to get home. You just have to make sure that you're disciplined so that he can't get out. So he'll come to you in that case. But Logan, it does make me nervous because this team has not rushed cohesively. This team has not been on their P's and Q's in their rush lanes. Is that something that is fixable this week? And are there more specifically coaching points that can be given to say, hey, this will hurt you, this won't? And does that change how Allen, Payne, and the rest of those guys up front rush?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's a good philosophical point, because it's like that's the thing they need to do is rush better in the interior. And the crux of your question is, can they do that? And I've kicked it around a couple, since Tuesday when I started watching Arizona film, and I do think yes. And the reason I think yes is because I do think the matchup outside is slightly more favorable to Washington. And so what I mean by that is I do think while Marvin Harrison Jr. is good, he's still a rookie, and he's still kind of running routes like a rookie. You know what I mean? He's still kind of there, he's tremendous. He's going to be fine, but he's still
scored a bunch of touchdowns, and his rookie routes are being hella productive.
Yeah, but a lot of them are kind of these deep crossers off play action. It's not like the sudden stuff or the Jamar Chase, the T Higgins, these deep digs that are super crisp. It's not like that, right? And again, a little bit of that's the quarterback too. Kyler Murray can't see sometimes those deep digs on the field. There was one I was just watching. I think it was versus Detroit. It's a 2nd and 9, and Marvin Harrison Jr. runs a really nice kind of high cross and bends it super flat in front of the quarter safety. And I'm like, that ball should be there, but Kyler can't see it. You know what I'm saying? So if I'm Joe Witt Jr., I'm like, I'm okay, I think, playing a little bit more man this week. And again, their skill position players are good. Michael Wilson's good. Trey McBride is a good football player. Their slot
McBride
receiver,
probably unlikely to play, I will say, with the concussion.
Okay.
So he got in a nasty collision last week, and so he missed practice on Wednesday. And I would think it's an uphill climb for him to get back on the field Sunday.
Which is another reason why we should be okay playing man coverage. And I do think like St. Juste, like again, he's going to give up some plays, but can match up well with Marvin Harrison Jr. just from like a physicality kind of savvy standpoint. And so if you can do that and make him hold the football, like one of the things I thought Detroit did well is they were like, we're going to kind of lock you up. We're going to play a little bit of man coverage outside, and we're going to rely on our defensive tackles to press the pocket. And they just did a great job of pressing the pocket. And so they ran a couple of what I would call TTs. So where like the shade and the 3 technique are working in some type of rush combination. And they did a really good job of like the shade getting across the center's face, picking the guard, and then the 3 technique really kind of getting some depth and working around it. So John and Duran ran that a couple times versus Cincinnati, but they ended up kind of getting stacked behind each other. Yeah. And I'm like, that's a technical thing that can be fixed, right? We can rep that some more this week and make sure we feel good about it, because Detroit probably ran that at least in the first half, probably 6 times, 7 times, and every time it ended up in a pressure. Because like while they are a solid offensive line, the interior is just okay. They're guys that have kind of kicked around a little bit, like good football players. But they're not amazing football players. And so I do think with John, Duran, Johnny Newton, if you get locked in on that stunt specifically and just general kind of pressing the pocket and working together in a 4-man rush, you should be able to. I also think when you watch Frankie Louvu rush in the A gap and the B gap on a back on the center, he does a good job of pressing the pocket. So I think that should be a point of emphasis this week, because again, like you said, he's 5'9". Like there are times where that rush, that interior offensive line gets pushed back, and you can just tell, like, I can't see anything. And this is my annual short quarterback Drew Brees story that comes up every 6 months on this podcast. But like New Orleans and Drew Brees said, we're going to have the best interior offensive line we can possibly have, because they knew how important it was to keep the depth of the pocket so he could see, right? It was kind of the same thing we ran into last year with Sam Howell. The depth of the pocket becomes so important because that's how I see my throwing lane, right? And they just don't have that consistently, especially against good interior pass rush. So I would say let's like man it up on the outside. Let's improve our technique a little bit, and let's get after this guy and see if we can press the pocket. Because from the pocket, it's not like you've seen it. It's not great all the time. And he does he make plays from the pocket? Yes. Yeah. But nowhere near the regularity that you see from Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. I mean, even Jayden Daniels has been more efficient from the pocket, in my estimation, watching these first 3 games.
Yeah, so a couple of next-gen stats for you. Kyler Murray is thrown past the sticks at the 6th highest rate in 2024. So what that tells you is that when he is making plays from the pocket, like, he is aggressive. And that does worry me on some level, because it's like, okay, if you're not getting the short stuff, but you make up for it with deeper stuff down the field, like, you can't give up the chunk plays. So it's going to be really important to be solid in coverage. And I waffle on the best strategy on that in terms of, do you just play coverage and be like, hey, if you want to sit in the pocket and pat the football, we don't think you can do it, versus being a little bit more aggressive with the man coverage and whatever. But also, I think that you made such a great point earlier that plays into how your approach is in terms of stacking the box. And so, part of the coverage decision is what structure are we going to play, period. And being able to stop the run and having that extra guy down probably leads you to a little bit more man-to-man situations on the outside, whether that's true man-to-man, cover 3, whatever. The other thing that I thought was interesting in terms of the pressure from next-gen stats on NFL Pro, Cardinals left guard Evan Brown has allowed just 4 pressures on only 1 sack on 102 pass rushes this season, which is just a 3.9% pressure rate, the 6th lowest amongst left guards this season, with a minimum of 40 pass blocks. He's projected to match up, of course, against Commanders defensive tackle John Allen, who is aligned as the right interior defensive lineman on 88% of snaps this season. Allen has generated 7 pressures on 74 pass rushes, 9.5%, and has recorded 195 pressures from 2020 to 2023, the 4th most amongst all defensive tackles. So this seems to be a strong point, that interior, at least Evan Brown on that offensive line. But I think what's interesting about the defensive line for Washington is we did see more variety last week. We saw some 3-down fronts with Newton, Payne, and Allen in there together. We saw Payne kick out to the outside. We saw John perhaps move around a little bit. So I do wonder, in terms of the matchups that Joe Witt tries to generate this week, who are they targeting on that Cardinals offensive line, and do they feel like they can finally break through from a pressure standpoint, and then how that affects the coverage behind it.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you mentioned the first stat, and I think they're all confirmed by film, like he's very aggressive in terms of throwing past the sticks. But to me, I think if you were to go back and watch, and I don't know a percentage, it's just kind of off my gut. A lot of them are like off schedule. Like he kind of pulls the ball down, he kind of dances around a little bit, and then he launches the football down the field. So if you are going to pressure, you need to make sure you get home, and you need to make sure you contain him. I think that's the other thing is, again, like he's good. He's a good football player, but I think he struggles. So that's one of the reasons why I would say you want to pressure him and kind of make sure you contain him in the pocket, is because like the longer he's back there, like versus a 4-man rush, for example, I think Buffalo did this a little bit, and the Buffalo's got really tremendous edge rushers. He was able to he's fast. So like even if they won, he's able to like do his little scoot out, run to the side, and like he's looking downfield and able to launch a football. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think you want him like sitting back there, because then he finds the throwing window. He finds the opportunity to make the play. So that's where I'd say being a little bit more aggressive, and not all the time. It's got to be in moderation to a certain extent, but it limits that element of his game. And so that's where I do think a disciplined rush pattern, bringing good pressures, trusting your guys outside. This feels like a good week for that. Like last week, I was advocating like never blitz him, like play like rush 3. It's okay if they run the football. This feels on third down specifically very different to me because of the play you're going against, and I want to stress him out. And so I think that's what I would do. That if I was the defensive coordinator, and obviously I'm not, so I'm really excited to see what Joe Wood Jr. does, and it's probably going to be a mixture. But I think because of how he plays the position, you want to kind of keep him unsettled, and you don't want him looking down the field. You almost want him to scramble in some ways. So I don't know. It's it'll be.
I don't want him to scramble. I very much do not want him to scramble.
But I would prefer that as opposed to if you watch the LA
scramble
Rams
to run versus scramble to throw.
Like the LA Rams game where he's like launching bombs off schedule because they're playing man coverage, and he's bought a little time, and it's like a 5-second play now instead of a 3-second play, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is wide open. Like that's what he does really well. Is he scrambles and takes a shot, and or whatever. It's not really a scramble because he's not passing line of scrimmage, but you know what I mean. He's buying time to take a shot.
He's extending plays. Yeah. Do you have any film recollection when I ask you this question of him rolling right versus left? Like obviously rolling right typically is easier for right-handed quarterbacks to make those kinds of throws.
Yeah, I mean he's rolled left. So he had the that no-look touchdown to, I think it was Marvin Harrison Jr., where he runs to his left, kind of opens his chest up and throws back to his, it's not his right, but kind of right down the middle. He is one of
those freaky dudes who can just go either way.
Yeah, and again, he's probably a little bit more comfortable going to his right, but like he does, and again, he's not great with the ball security, but he's a special mover. He's a special mover, and it's going to create a little bit of an issue. But I do think you should, if a Commanders fan, you should basically be like, the key to winning this game, in my opinion, is you stop the run on 1st and 2nd down. You get him in 3rd and long-ish, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, because that's where he's least effective, in my opinion. That's where he's the least effective. Like Joe Burrow, for example, it was like 3rd and 15, whatever. Like, I feel fine. I'm going to make these plays. He's the least effective in those situations. So the more you can get him in those situations where we can't play action, we can't boot him, we can't kind of be in the teeth of our normal offense, and you can manage him in the pocket, like keep him in the pocket, like he doesn't see it super well. So I think however you do that is going to be huge. And we talked about like on the review pod, like how some of the run fits weren't great versus Cincinnati, and and that's something that's got to be cleaned up. That's definitely got to be a priority this week. Because if James Conner gets going, this offense is devastating. And I think you can watch the Rams game to see how devastating it can be, because they're always in good down and distance. He's taking shots, and they can do whatever they want in terms of moving him and getting vision down the field. And it becomes very problematic very quickly. But if you can kind of, like if you watch the Detroit game, that offense, they only scored 10 points. I think it was in the first, they scored 10 points in the first half, and then they didn't really score for the rest of the game. Because Detroit was like, you're not running the ball. Kyler, you got to beat us from the pocket. Like, do it. Yeah. And he couldn't do it.
Yeah. Just in one last injury note, if I didn't say this already, Cleveland Ferrell is out for this game. So it's going to be interesting to watch who they use on the outside. Javonte Jean-Baptiste Good game against Cincinnati. Had his first career sack. Congrats to him. He's a rookie, Jamin Davis, basically a rookie at the position, if you will. And so you talk about rush discipline and rush, all that kind of stuff. Guys that are inexperienced are going to have to step up and play like vets. The good news for especially Jamin, like, he can run. He's one of the few guys that can run Kyler down. So that is going to be interesting to watch in terms of personnel, who they use. Obviously, Dante Fowler is going to be the guy who is the main guy opposite of Dorrance Armstrong, but something to watch of how they replace Cleveland Ferrell and the discipline of those young guys when they're in there against this Arizona offense. All right, let's flip the field, Logan, and take a look at this Arizona defense. They've got a bunch of really talented players. Probably the biggest star is Budda Baker, their safety, but they've also got a bunch of unheralded type of guys who just play their faces off. And in a lot of ways, this is kind of what Washington wants to be in terms of a defense that just plays hard, plays fast, plays physical. Dan Quinn said earlier this week about his defense that they're not where he wants them yet, but it's getting better, which is kind of what we've seen when we've watched the tape, and we talked about that more on Tuesday. But Jonathan Gannon has done a tremendous job in his first year and change here of setting a tone with this Arizona defense. What do you see when you watch them on tape from how they play, both schematically and from that kind of physicality and intention standpoint?
Yeah, they play hard. They play hard as all outdoors. And I think, like you said, there's nobody out there that's like, a household name. Budda Baker is kind of their guy, and they have some guys on the edge. They've got David Collins, who was a first-round pick a couple years ago. He's a good player, but not great. He's making a position switch. He's moving outside linebacker. I think they're two inside linebackers because they're White and Mac Wilson are good players. Like they kind of embody that what you're talking about. They're flexible. They can blitz. They can cover pretty well. They're fast to the football. Gardeck, the other outside linebacker, is kind of very in the same mold. He's an undersized special teams guy that has cultivated some pass rush and has become a very productive player for them. I think he had like 3 sacks against LA and an interception. So interception against Detroit. So obviously being very productive. But I do think a lot of the production, excuse me, stems from the style of defense that they're playing. And we talked about, Todd Bowles early in the season being very complicated. We talked about Lou Anarumo in terms of some of the coverage stuff he did being very complicated. This is the most complicated defense Jayden will play against this year. So far this year. Like, they are really fun to watch from that standpoint. They bring a ton of like fire zones, where it's like, hey, we're showing pressure here. We're dropping the outside linebackers out. That's why like Zaven Collins and Gardeck are so good, because they can kind of get into space and cover. We're going to have 8 guys at the line of scrimmage. Sometimes we're bringing 8. Sometimes we're bringing 4 in like simulated pressures, and everybody else is dropping out. So their ability to get from pressure looks, seemingly pressure looks, to normal coverage structures, bring 5-man rushes, and kind of make sure you've got enough droppers out in the right positions. Like you can tell they coach those guys to drop really well because they're in good spots. They're reading quarterback eyes. They're getting good depth. They're relating to number 1, relating to number 2. It's tough. And so like you see, I think they have, I don't know how many interceptions they have this year, but they've accumulated quite a few turnovers and interceptions, and it's just like quarterbacks just throwing it straight to dudes because they didn't know they were there. Like they were like, you should be open. You're not open. Here's the football, turnover. Right. And so I think like that's something coming out of this game, because there's no like killer in terms of one-on-one matchup. Like everybody feels very manageable. There's no Trey Hendrickson this week. It really comes down to the scheme and how well these guys execute the scheme and how evolved it's gotten. Like last year or 2 years ago when they played them, it was like, pretty simple. It was like cover 3, maybe a little cover 6, but we're very straightforward. And now you see kind of, this is year 2 of the defense, year 3 of the defense. Yeah, and it's, year 2. Yeah. And it's really blossomed, and it's hard to manage. And that's, there was for one of our other shows, they were talking about how someone predicted them to be the worst defense in the NFL, but like they're like 19th, and when you look at them, it's scheme. The scheme is excellent, and the way those guys are bought into the scheme, because they're able to create pressures with limited rushers, like we talked about, simulated pressures, overloads, stunts, They brought a really cool pressure against the Detroit Lions that led to an interception. So basically they brought a 6-man rush with 2 zone droppers. And this is something that the Indianapolis Colts used to do, is when the quarterback opens to the side, the 2 droppers just sprint to the side that he's looking to take away underneath. And then they rotate the coverage. So they're able to get to 4 over 3 essentially with less coverage players. So one half of the field is like completely open, but like it doesn't matter because the pressure's going to get there and you can't. So like that type of stuff is tough. And I think, obviously Cliff is going to need an excellent protection plan. They're going to need a lot of solutions. And I think the screen game will be really interesting this week, how effective it's going to be. Because sometimes like it looks like they're going to blitz, they drop out, there's dudes standing right where the screen's going to be completed. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just, you don't know on the snap where they're going to end up. And obviously there's some indications from coverage and rotation, but they're good at hiding that stuff. So I think this is going to be a really significant test for Jayden. And it feels like a game where like you want to make sure you're running the football very effectively and being super efficient, because I think you can. I think when you look at Detroit in the first half of that game, they basically were like, we're not throwing the ball. We're going to run the ball. And they couldn't stop them because they're not super big up front. They're not super physical. Even the linebackers I mentioned are really good. They're a little undersized, kind of safety body types. So I would say, how do we get to running the football? How do we get to deleveraging Jayden? How do we keep him out of these kind of really complicated third down structures? That would be my my high level game plan notes going into this thing.
Yeah, so there's a lot there to obviously double click on. Let's start off with where you ended though in running the football, because one thing that I'll add that we'll circle back to is they also match really well. Like there's a lot of times I should say when I'm watching them and I'm like, is this man? Is this zone? And it's like, oh no, it's zone, but they latch onto receivers and it's not your Madden bubble zone. Like
they're good. They're good. They're a good defense. They're good defense, and they present challenging things for a quarterback.
Especially one who hasn't seen a ton of that at a high level so far. Although, Jayden did pretty well against Alabama, and that's the most complicated defense he might see in his life, which was kind of a fun thing to go back and watch when we were watching him during the draft process. But the reason I just mentioned that is it would seem that the way to avoid having to deal with all of that, all the pressures, all of the coverage things, everything we just talked about, is to run the football. And the one thing that Arizona hasn't faced this year so far is a rushing quarterback. And so that is something that I think is
Josh Allen.
Yeah, but maybe. They don't. I guess
run him. Yeah, I mean he's special. He's like, but I would classify him in kind of this like Jayden Daniels is aspiring to be Josh Allen in terms of so this is, I'm really glad you brought this up, because if you watch that game, there are times where it's 3rd and 15 and Josh gets a little bit confused and he just runs, because even these zone droppers, they're not always looking at him; they're dropping to spots. And he's able to run for first downs. So I do think, like, to your point, like Josh Allen, and obviously he's special because of what he can do from the pocket, how they've constructed that offense. But I think this is a good opportunity. If you're a little bit confused, like, it's okay to run. You know what I mean? Like, don't, like, because again, like there's the Jared Goff one. Like he's standing back. I think he throws 2 interceptions versus Arizona, right? He's back there. He's looking at, like, and this keeps them in the game. These 2 interceptions. I'm talking about Arizona now versus Detroit. He's back there. I understand exactly what he's looking at, and the tight end breaks across the plugger's face, and there's a dropper just standing. Like the dropper didn't even move. He's just standing right in the zone and makes the interception. And the other interception is very similar. It's just if you're not sure, I would say don't throw it, because they really are opportunistic in that way, and they're going to make you hurt if you're not careful.
So, yeah, no, absolutely. And the reason I bring up the running quarterback thing, though, and kind of, I'll say exclude Allen, like obviously the scramble stuff is hugely important. But in the regular season, Buffalo doesn't run him by design nearly as much, maybe in the red zone. But obviously Washington will. And I'm curious how that affects like Arizona's run fits and some of the things like that when all of a sudden you have to account for the quarterback run game. But where are the opportunities to run the football for Cliff? What kind of runs have worked against Arizona this year? And where, and then I guess the last piece of that too is like, how does Austin Eckler's absence affect the efficacy of this run game? Or do we think that the runs that they will run are going to be Brian Robinson runs anyway? And we're looking much more like week 2 against the Giants, where he had a $150 than last week where he's averaging, 1 point whatever yards a carry.
That's a really good question, and we probably should have prepped this a little bit more. But so for example, the Detroit Lions are just like, put your mouthpiece in. Here's an extra lineman. Like, we are going to out physical you. Like, good luck. And they're just That's what their philosophy is, right? LA, they want to run duo, and they kind of got it shoved in their face, because they're all lines banged up. They're not healthy. Like, it makes sense, right? They're not physically where they need to be to do it. I think the one group that I would kind of model the run game after is the Bills, because they have James Cook, right?
Yeah.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
And they run a lot of stuff from the gun, and they do a really good job of that. And I think like creating space, like if I'm Cliff, I'm watching that film pretty closely, because how do they create space? How do they relate to these wide splits? And that's what Fred said the other day, because I guess he played in the defense. I forget where it was. I think it was probably here in Washington, where they ran a lot of zone pressures. And he's like, if you widen the splits out, it makes it super hard for us to disguise, because we do have to relate to those wide splits. So I'd probably go look at the Bills and say, how are they positioning? What are their formations are in? Because James Cook, even on like screens, like little check, not even screens, like little check down kind of like outs and flats and flares, like it kind of became an analogous for their run game. And then they do like this little cool like trap from the gun, and they run but he killed them. He killed them. And I think like that's something that I would probably look at and say, if they're going to respect our our receivers, like let's take an advantage, much in the same way that Cliff did versus the New York Giants, right? Like kind of, we're going to spread you out. We're going to get these favorable boxes, and we're going to go get it. So I think that's probably the way I would look at it in terms of like teams that have been effective, is because again, like it's a complicated defense. They're physical. They play aggressively to the football, but if we spread them out, we get guys in space. I think that's going to be to our advantage. Now, you mentioned the Austin Eckler thing. I think that's going to be really hard to fill those shoes. Austin's done a really good job, like we talked about on the preview show, of every time he touches it, not every time, but over the course of a game, he'll find you an explosive play. So he had the kick return, he had the explosive touchdown run last week, he had a couple of big plays against New York, and I think that's what, and even against Tampa Bay, he took a check down for 30 yards. You know what I mean? Like it makes it so much easier to run an offense when you have a guy with that skill set. And so not having that and losing a little bit of that offensive juice, I think is going to be really interesting, because now it puts the onus on Cliff, it puts the onus on Jayden to help find and manufacture some of those explosive plays. And again, like we talk about explosive plays all the time from an analytics perspective. If you get 3 explosive plays, usually you're scoring 3 touchdowns. And so now you've taken away 3 of them from your offense. So what are you going to do? And so who's going to step up into that role is going to be really, really interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, because I looked this up yesterday as I was talking about Eckler on the radio show, we just got in the news, and I was like, let me quickly sort out these explosive runs and look at all the 10-plus yard rushes on the season. Most of them are Jayden on scrambles. So he is still the primary driver of their explosive plays, and we talked about how valuable his ability to keep them on schedule is, but Eckler obviously has had a couple of big ones in some of the screen game. This from Next Gen Stats I thought was really interesting, Logan. Jayden Daniels has the average, or the second quickest time to throw among qualified passers, 2.43 seconds. And he's attempted a quick pass, which is classified as under 2.5 seconds, at the highest rate in the league in 2024. 59% of his passes coming out in 2.5 seconds or less. But here's where it matches up with the Cardinals. The Cardinals have allowed the second most yards per attempt and tied for the 4th most touchdowns against quick passes this season. So they're giving up 8.2 yards an attempt in quick game / screen / anything that's out and under 2.5, and they've given up 3 touchdowns on those. So I think that's an interesting element of like another way to avoid the pressures, avoid the rush, is get the ball out quickly. Obviously, if you're going quick and they drop a zone dropper right in your path, that can be a recipe for disaster. But if you can get that part right, and this is where I wonder about Cliff's ability to, not wonder about, like, I'm excited about Cliff's ability to use formations to kind of save himself and set the offense up for success. If you can get that stuff right, it does feel, based off those numbers, albeit a small sample size, just 3 games, that there are opportunities here in the screen game, in the quick game, to slip a tackle and then go make a big play.
Yeah, and in the Detroit game, for example, like a lot of their early completions are a quick game, because usually you're playing some type of off. They are like a zone-based team. They do play match, like you were saying. They do play a little bit of man, but they're like zone. And so if you can kind of take advantage of some of those quick-hitting, free access plays, like, why not? And I think I think that's a really good point, and I think it's going to be awesome to see how they kind of utilize it. Because again, like Jonathan Gannon's a smart dude. It's his defense. He's not calling it, but it's his defense. They're going to have a plan for our quick game. Like every team, like they've seen how effective we've been with like these screens and the RPOs, and they're going to have a solution. Like the thing about that I think that is maybe underrated in this, and I just thought about it right now, is that Brian Johnson was with him for a long time in Philly, right? And like I think he's going to have the keys to the test. But I also know that they were one of the highest RPO teams when he was in Philly, with Jalen Hurts. And he's going to have a solution to stop some of the RPO stuff like that. I think it's going to be very effective. So I think that is the kind of the ultimate chess match. Like to your point, is like they know what we know well, and we know what they know well. Like what is our solution kind of counterpoint to get there? And obviously there's an execution element. Like we got to execute better than they do. But I think that's why these matchups get so interesting as the week goes on, because you realize these relationships, you realize these connections, you see the holes in what they do. Because again, it's not a perfect defense. Like when you're bringing pressure the way they're bringing it, you are susceptible to people reading it out and making big plays. Like Josh Allen scored 35 points on him, and he's a special player, obviously, but there are avenues to score a lot of points. And so I think that like as you go, it's just like maybe you got the right play called at the right time and ends up being an explosive play, and that's really kind of how they won the Cincinnati game, is they just were like always in the right play. And if they weren't in the right play, Jayden Daniels made a play, like you said, like in terms of explosive scrambles and runs, like that's going to be a huge part of this game, I think. And as long as he stays healthy, he doesn't take any big hits, I think, and plays efficient football, makes good decisions, there's definitely an avenue for the Commanders' offense to stay as hot as they've been the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, God, you imagine Tress Way is just like, all right, I guess I'm not punting again. That'd be cool. I do really think the Eckler thing is huge, though. I'm thinking back to some of the big plays that they gave up, and there's one play that's just a stupid Josh Allen play in the Bills game where they come with a pressure. Allen somehow gets out, like shakes off a tackle in the pocket, gets out. James Cook had went to block. The guy that he was going to block winds up being in man-to-man on him. I think it was like a green dog situation. And then that guy goes and blitzes when he sees that James Cook is blocking. Cook leaks out. Josh Allen runs out, finds Cook for what turns out to be a 20-yard gain that should have been a minus 12. So that's fun. Stafford,
when he's in his bag, he is the most fun quarterback to watch. I know people say like he is just like
he's the only one that can compete with Pat on that level.
Dude, it's like I'm big, I'm fast, I've got a tremendous arm, I'm seeing stuff really well. It's like good luck.
I think there was some stat that like he has the highest percentage of completions within like a yard of the sideline. Like his ability to just dot guy, like that's for some reason that just popped in my mind. I think that's a real number. If not, nobody cares. But like his ability to, and think about watching him though, like how often is he rolling and just finds a guy on the side? Like not talking about the receiver on the sideline, like he is basically out of bounds.
Yes.
And he throws. And like he has the highest number or percentage of those of anybody in the league. So yeah. But also I think of like there was a play where Stafford saw a blitz and they released the back and he's able to loft it. And like, but that's Matt Stafford, right? Yeah. His ability to see things quickly, get the ball out to a back in space and let that back do the work generates an explosive play. So it really does come down to Jayden's ability to see it, which like, duh, he's the quarterback. That's always going to be the case. But it is the kind of thing where as these tests get harder and harder, and from a schematic standpoint, for all the reasons that we've discussed, this is probably the hardest one he's had yet. Can he continue the high level of execution that he's had? And specifically, like, can he not make the mistakes that he hasn't made so far? No interceptions through 3 games. They haven't lost a fumble, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that really, because that's the one thing I get worried about watching this defense is they do seem to get people a little bit confused in terms of like, oh, I didn't expect someone to be there. And Jayden is a guy that, through his tremendously well-documented preparation is like he prides himself on knowing where people are going to be. And you can tell like, and I will say this too, like this is another important point. Like I thought Lou Anarumo came out with a little bit more conservative approach because of how Jayden is as a runner. So maybe Jonathan Gannon adopts something similar. I don't know. But if this defense is at its best, it's going to be hard on third down for him. And so like what are the tools, like you said, for Cliff to kind of make it so it's a little bit cleaner, that they can't disguise it as long, and can Jayden make sure that he's prepped for it? And sometimes you can't be prepped for something until you see it for the first time. So that's why this game feels kind of like I don't want to say trap game, but it feels a little bit sketchy because of what they do defensively and how hard it is to deal with, even for the offensive line, which has played really well. It's just hard. Like, are you a rusher? Yes. Are we? And then we gotta check this. We got to fan. We gotta squeeze back. All that kind of stuff. So it's a really interesting challenge. And again, they're not the most physically gifted defense I've ever seen, but they are schemed up really well. So, and then I do think offensively, I do think our defense kind of matches up okay with them in a way that we haven't seen over the last couple of weeks of the season. So really curious to see how that matchup goes as well. So the more you talk about it, the more you're like, oh, this is going to be a lot of fun to watch, which is always exciting. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Arizona might be 1-2, but they played Buffalo really tough. They beat the absolute crap out of the Rams, and then they played Detroit really tough. So their two losses come against two teams that we expect to see playing deep into January. And they beat the absolute tar out of a team that we expect because of injuries, probably not, but is extremely well coached, and they still won by a billion. So definitely going to be fun. You'll be on the call, so enjoy that. We will reconvene 7:30 is when we've been doing the live streams for the late games. I'm not exactly sure who's going to be on it yet, so I need to go figure that out. But 7:30, we'll have the Take Command instant reaction show on YouTube at the Team 980 and at 106.7 The Fan, and then we will put it in audio form in your podcast feeds immediately after. So Sunday night, you will have an instant reaction show, and then Logan and I will be back on Tuesday for a film breakdown. Until then, again, all the latest news live on the radio. Check us out, Hoffman Show on the Team 980 from 4 to 7. That also streams live on YouTube at the Team 980 if you'd prefer. And the podcast on demand anytime, anywhere. Just search The Hoffman Show. Thanks so much for watching and listening. If you made it this far, you haven't subscribed, clearly you like it enough to make it this far, so go ahead and do that, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.